Hello and welcome to Voices of Witness, Poetry Ireland's event for the Dublin Arts and Human Rights Festival 2021. I'm Catherine Ann Cullen, Poet in Residence at Poetry Ireland, and I'm delighted to be presenting some wonderful poets, writers and singers for you this evening. We're going to hear voices that bear witness to traumatic events, campaign for change and express solidarity with those who resist and those who suffer. We'll explore the ways in which words, poetry, stories and song can preserve memory, provide solace and reflect on our times. And we also celebrate those who challenge borders, inequalities and injustice. We've 4 poets for you this evening, a storyteller and a singer. Of the poets, Fióna Bolger has lived in Ireland and in India. Her first collection, A Compound of Words, was published by Yoda Press in Delhi, and her second collection, Love in the Original Language, is forthcoming from Salmon Press. Supriya Kaur Dhaliwal was born in the Himalayan town of Palampur in India. She is the 2021 Charles Wallace India Trust Fellow at the University of Kent, and Supriya's debut collection, The Yak Dilemma, was published by Mackinac Press in London. Richie Keane is a community worker with Fatima Groups United Family Resource Centre. He grew up in Ballymun and is co-founder of Labour LGBT and SIP2 LGBTQ. Richie says he attempts to write poetry with Fatima Poetry Vigilantes and occasionally succeeds. And as the writer in residence with Poetry Vigilantes for the past year, I can tell you that Richie's being more than modest. Owen Devordun is the author of the award-winning Why the Moon Travels from Skene Press last year, and a creative soul with a passion for poetry, folk herbalism and preserving the beauty of traveller folklore and history. He's the manager of an education centre and a former vice chair of the Irish Traveller Movement and council member with Midcare Widden. But we're going to start this evening with a song from Neve Parsons, one of the most distinctive voices in Irish music. She's recorded 9 solo albums and guested on many others. Neve teaches on Ballyfermot College of Further Education's Traditional Music Performance course. She's president of the executive of the Musicians Union of Ireland and a founding member of Fair Play Gender Balance in Irish Traditional Music.
Hello, my name is Niamh Parsons. I'm a traditional singer from Dublin. I like singing old songs and songs that have things to say. I am going to sing a song called Bread and Roses. The term bread and roses comes from a speech given by an American activist, Helen Todd. In her speech, she mentioned bread for all and roses too. The song itself comes from a poem, Bread and Roses, by James Oppenheim, and it was first published in 1911. As we go marching, marching in the beauty of the day, a million darkened kitchens, 1,000 mill lofts grey, are touched with all the radiance that the sudden sun discloses. For the people hear us singing bread and roses, bread and roses. As we come marching, marching, we battle too for men, for they are women's children, and we mother them again. Our lives shall not be sweated from birth until life closes. Hearts starve as well as bodies. Give us bread, but give us roses. As we come marching, marching, unnumbered women dead, go crying through our singing their ancient call for bread. Small art and love and beauty, their drudging spirits new. Yes, it is bread we fight for, but we fight for roses too. As we go marching, marching, we bring the greater days. For the rising of the women means the rising of the race. No more the drudge and idler tend that toil where one reposes, but a sharing of life's glories, bread and roses, bread and roses. Yes, a sharing of life's glories, bread and roses, bread and roses.
Hello, my name is Fiona Bulger. I'm a poet and facilitator, and I've lived most of my adult life between Ireland and India. I'm interested in plurilingualism, which is using all the words in your head, regardless of whether or not they belong in this language or that language. And I'm also interested in the crossing of borders in real life, migration, and how that impacts on people. I'm interested in the idea that our rights are protected when we're native or we are on certain sides of certain borders. And I'm interested in the issue of people who find themselves between borders and the way in which their rights may not be protected. The Universal Declaration is supposed to be universal, but who protects the rights? So these are questions for me. Today I'm going to read you 3 poems. The first poem focuses on the 27th Amendment to the Irish Constitution in 2004 and Article 15 of the Universal Declaration. It's called "No Child is Born to Flicker in the Shadows." I open my daughter's new Irish passport and printed beneath the mountains, rivers and coastline, I find: "It is the entitlement and birthright of every person born in the island of Ireland, which includes its islands and seas, to be part of the Irish nation." For one crazy moment, I believe this is true. The second poem I'd like to read for you today deals with issues around homelessness and lack of adequate housing provision. The community in Ireland most affected by this are the traveller community, the Mincare community, and I'd like to remember that we're at the moment around the 6th anniversary of the Carrickmines tragedy, in which 10 members of this community were killed in a horrible fire caused by lack of adequate housing provision. This poem is called Corporation Sewage Clearance Division. They've come to pump the shit. There's a build-up in the office block. The couple in sleeping bags at the entrance are woken by flashing lights, a straining engine lengthening another day, begging to be brightened by a watery sun. The only heat from exhaust vents round the corner at Tesco. Outside, slouched, daydreaming of suctioning time from cold, damp days. And my last poem I'd like to dedicate to all the writers and journalists and poets who are constantly telling truths in India, some of whom have been killed. I'd like to remember Gauri Lankesh, and some of whom have been held in jail, unproved charges. Right now we can talk about Vara Rao, who's out on bail and hopefully won't be put back in jail, and those who keep telling truths regardless. Chakra. Ashoka's wheel spins through history, stone-carved symbol, spinning wheel, cycle wheel. I feel freedom on 2 wheels. At speed you can outrun the heat for a short time, but then when you stop, she catches you. and revenge is hers. As I stand astride my cycle, enforcing the red light on impatient truck traffic, I hear the copper coin click of people leaves over the wayside altar, roadside temple, shrine to the hope of people that something may change. The trishul stands, 3 lemons, sharp and bitter, pierced by its prongs. Lights turn green. I move off, keeping to the edge as trucks speed by, boy banging the side to scare pedestrians, dogs, cows, cyclists. Motorbikes weave in and out, blue bottles never quite there when the vehicles close in. In this procession, we travel past the temple, where side by side women will cook dal rice over wood fires. But that is January, and this is July. We eat Venpungal and Sakaripungal to remind us of the fresh village of the Harvest Festival, when we will be far away. No chance to sit before the temple, light our kindling and let the goodness overflow before the morning sun. The biryani of Eid has been cooked, shared and enjoyed, and we are celebrating the joy of rice and dal. My daughter discovers India's ancient kings, Muslim and Buddhist and Hindu, a past fast being buried by a saffron-bound vision of the future. This history not destined for school books but burned in a pyre on which the living dissenter may also be burned. Katharipu Niram, a sari the colour of the flower of the aubergine plant. Katharikai Puri, soft, spicy, sweet, as a handloom podave, in strands of wind spun on a cycle wheel, woven into an afternoon sea breeze, floating on my skin. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Supriya Dhaliwal and I am a poet. As a poet, I am very interested in the idea of what lies in between, what is on the margins of the metaphysical or the palpable, what is on the borders of the geographical or the physical. I think that we must believe in certain things forever, for they might turn real someday. And I want to echo the words of human rights lawyer and poet Mona Arshi, that the goal of human rights is to sustain this universe's universality. And that is why I think we must keep on believing in our rights, our freedom forever, for it might turn real someday. I will quickly read 2 poems. The first poem that I'm going to read is called Reading Akasha Hidali in Northern Ireland. My uncles drink scotch by the gallon, and my aunts make endless cups of cha, each uncle being the father of a daughter who lives overseas for a better fortune, each aunt being the mother of a son who immigrated to become the one who got away from the mafias that wanted to get hold of his inheritance. When my family sees Kashmir being turned into a country without a post office on their tellies, wherever they are sipping their scotch and cha, they call me to tell the BBC has reported Northern Ireland as the Kashmir of the United Kingdom. I sigh when my uncles ask me to spell Belfast, adding, how do they even get here from London? I should have chosen to study in California instead, they think. Who am I to say anything? I write ghazals in English in a country where I'm constantly told that English is not my first language, and yet I hide my pain under iambic pentameter. When I read my Anglo ghazal in a theatre about the partition of Punjab in front of the best lot of poets around, someone calls my lot of people refugees. Aga, how little we know. We were exiles in every land, every language, even the language in which words were unimportant. When we did not cry in Urdu on our births and alas cries that refused to be in Punjabi, are only indifferently innocent tributes sent out to a world which was never ours, which could never be ours. I've been working on a sequence of poems around the life of the Irish theatre practitioner who lived in India named Nora Richards. And my next poem is a part of that sequence, and it is called Nora Marches with the Farmers to the Single Border. When a nightmare lands in a Google search box, we rely on the internet gods to tell us why what is already ours could never be ours anymore. While our virgin lands await habitation by our new rural orders, we walk wearing garments on our feet, polished by the dirt we are proud to claim our alliance with. Almost a century ago, I once boarded the Lloyd Trestino ocean liner bound for Bombay from Holland. And Bombay really felt much farther than anywhere I had ever been. But where we are today is a destination where we always arrived whenever we wanted to set off. Thank you.
My name is Richie Keane. I work as a community worker with Fatima Groups United Family Resource Centre in Dublin 8. I am a campaigner on LGBT plus reproductive justice and kind of working class community activism. And here are a couple of poems from my work with Poetry Vigilantes group here in Fatima. A New Ireland. His badge collection reflected a new Ireland. Marriage equality badges and repeal the 8th, rainbows and repeal hearts, a shrine to a new 21st century Ireland. All that shoe leather, all those marches, all those hopes and dreams and bitter tears. From the garden of remembrance, much to remember. The silenced, the shamed, the persecuted, the ostracized. The underdogs have finally snatched victory from defeat. Chinks of light shattering the shadows of a cozy cartel of crozier and harp. An unfinished revolution, much done, a lot more to do. Budget. Peggy performed miracles. Factory worker feeding a family from nothing. More loaves and fishes, a weekly Ballymun miracle. Once Geraldine Kennedy, ex-Irish Times and PD, managed a week on a budget in Ballymun. Oh, how we laughed and guffawed at her 7-day budgetary prowess. Try life on a perpetual budget, baby. The women of the matriarchy of Ballymun, cooks, cleaners, counsellors, educators, economists, and psychotherapists, mammies of the circular economy and all of a Tuesday. Try life on a perpetual budget, baby. Canaries in the coal mine. We are the canaries in the coal mine. First defense against fascists. We are the fags and the queers and the homos. We are the feminists. We are the trade unionists. We are the migrants. We are the anarchists. First, they came for the asylum seekers, burnt down the hotel, fomented racism, battered Izzy over the head with a 4x2, wrapped in an Irish flag. The scandal and indignity of it all. Naked fascism on a grey day in Dublin. We are the canaries in the coal mine, remembering our lineage and our heritage, remembering our community, remembering an injury to one is an injury to all. We are the canaries in the coal mine. And these two poems are for Wafa, Mustafa, Zemia from Gaza, and remembering her family in Gaza and the West Bank. Fatima. On a rainy day in Fatima, I run through 60 words for rain. I see kids in a Dublin playground, playing rock, paper, scissors. I hear giggles. On a rainy day, a girl named Fatima has tear gas and white phosphorus raining down on her No laughter in the playground. Intifada rock, eviction paper, surgical scissors, erasure of heritage, erasure of language, erasure of Palestine, the cartography of apartheid. Breaking news. In breaking news, I see apartheid Israel, the penal laws, the settler colonialism, the plantation system. The network news Chiron dilutes this to clashes and conflict. It fails to connect the dots. The daily harassment, the ritual humiliation, the evictions, the phosphorus bombs, the bullets and tear gas, the assassinations, the murders, a shrine to inhumanity, genocide for slow learners, where even the olive trees are bleeding.
Hi there, my name is Oein DeBhairduin. I'm an Inker, also known as an Irish traveller, and I'm very active in the spaces around education, LGBT rights, and rights for the Indigenous and nomadic people of Ireland. And today what I wanted to share with people would be one of our traditional tales from our, I suppose, our tradition of storytelling, inspiration, understanding the world around us. And I do think that those tales, expressions, and understandings are actually a part of our fundamental right to our identity, which is so very well knitted into the very fibre and fabric of who we are and where we exist within the tapestry of Irish society. And talking about tapestries, this story itself is a traditional tale of where spiders come from. The title of it is called A Bior Tulla Amala Swert, and it's, in English is called the Women Who Gather. The first story I recall telling was one I had heard at school. I was about 9. I was sitting on a small wooden chair in the backyard and was watching my father and a neighbour cut sods of soil in the garden in an attempt to dig out the foundations of a small shed that was never to be. The groove was marked that day. It exists, and every time I see it, I'm reminded of the sharing of stories. The tale I had heard at school was about the Virgin Mary and the Christ child, and how they had hid in a cave from some soldiers, and a kind spider had wove a web so thick at the entrance of the cave that the soldiers did not venture in, deciding that no one had passed that way in many a year. I had only half heard it before I decided I was going to pass it on. It was small, and I was small, I should say, and I was wistful for Subline, short in words and shy in company. But the anticipation of telling a tale filled my steps home with a subtle joy and a loud excitement. I remember telling the story and feeling very proud of it, and feeling as tall as if I was standing in the chair rather than sitting on it. My father stood for a short time listening to me, with his hand resting on the top of under his chin as he lay in the handle of the shovel, his grey eyes regarding me kindly until I finished. After a while, he returned to the shoveling of the soil and aside and told me the tale of where spiders come from and why some still weave the red cords upon our wrists. Once there were old women who would travel the land carrying tightly woven willow baskets to gather the fallen bark of crabapple trees, wilting St. John's wort plants, and any fresh species that they could find. They plucked the flax that grew brazenly on the roadside, and the wool that snared on the thorns of brambles, orton trees, and firs. They dressed mostly in black, but the edges of their garments were lined in red, white, and yellow. Some of the women had additional stripes in their dresses of different colours, one for each of their children, living or departed. Their hair, long, was plaited in firm braids, and about their hips they had small beady pockets, embellished with medals, tokens, and buttons that were tied tightly. Every evening they would boil and dye the wool red in a big cast iron pot that rested in the campfire in the heart of the molly in which they lived. During the night, they would continue to spin and weave the cords, to render them red for the young children. They would sing songs of hope and melodies of joy in a chorus of sweet voices with minds of very clear intent, stirring and carding and weaving thoughts and prayers into the chords for the young. At dusk, they would gather. At night, they would labour. And as the dawn came, they would rest peacefully in their beds. And this is how it was for a very, very long time. However, as years wore on, more and more children were born and welcomed into the world. And the old women who gathered began to struggle to keep the pace of their labour. They worked and worked and worked to make the cords of red, colour of blood, tones of deep red, and iron rust. Despite the struggle, they continue to keep weaving the cords, and that one day they will weave the cord long enough to encircle the entire world, so no child would ever be without the care of a loving blessing. Dawn and dusk and night and day blended into one as the work continued, and the old women who gathered forgot to stop, eat, to rest. Over time, their fingers, who once kissed a soft pink with dye, became darker and darker. Some were brown from the dust of the ashes, others are black from the coal of the well-stocked fire that kept the dying pot boiling. Still, the old women who gathered worked on. The molly that had once been filled with such songs and dances of joy became silent as they continued to focus more and more on their task. Now the sweat of the brows began to wash away the red from the cord, and it became silken grey gossamer. In time, the cords became thinner and delicate as filigree, but at their core they held their strength. Still, the old women who gathered worked on. They grew thin and bony as they neither slumbered nor feasted, and they began to shrink. Some of the old women who gathered worked one or two of their very own fingers away, while others kept the gathering baskets so tightly strapped to their backs, never bothering to take them off between gathering and dyeing and weaving the cord. Their hearts, they remained warm, and the task remained their focus. In time, the old women who gathered grew smaller and smaller, less of this world and more of another, until one day they looked little more than a bundling of fingers, spinning and weaving with the gathering baskets on their backs, adorned with the stripes and shading of the once belonged to the dresses and to the beady pockets, and they had become the very first spiders. And even now, they continue the work, spinning onwards and onwards across the very world.
Thanks to Owen Devordun for his beautiful story, and to our singer Niamh Parsons and poets Fiona, Supriya and Richie. It's Ann Cullen here again, and I'm going to read 3 poems. The first is one of a series I've been writing as poet in residence about tenement artefacts in the North Inner City folklore collection. It's called Monto Cross, and it's about the hypocrisy of the treatment of women, in this case prostitutes in the Monto area of Dublin about 100 years ago. You'll see in the poem that while church and state vilified the woman, it was the ordinary people who brought her comfort at the end of her days. Monto Cross. As she lay dying in the joiner's tenement, the priest disdained to bless her, for Margaret Carroll had once whacked a man with a poker when he wouldn't cough up. You could makeshift a cross from twigs and string, but the joiner trawled to the dockyard for 2 scantlings of wood, chiselled from each a rebate so they sat snug together. He lacquered his work with thin paint till it was quite respectable. When he got home, the daughter who had been taken from her was by her side. Margaret had no strength left, but the cross was light as air, lighter than any air in the choke of the Gloucester diamond. She clutched it with the hands she had held up for her prison photograph. It was black as a brothel poker, black as she was painted, black as the chemise a judge had once given his favourite girl. That's Monto Cross. My second poem, Spike City, is about the crisis of homelessness in Dublin and how people can choose not only to ignore it, but sometimes to make it worse. Spike City. We've made a bed of nails for you outside our head office to discourage you one more time. Some days you challenge us. We find ourselves stepping over a ragged yogi balanced on the concrete spikes. We call it defensive architecture, as though we were under attack from the rough sleeping that we make rougher. There's a spike in homelessness, but it won't pierce the glass edifice where we practice mindfulness every Tuesday lunchtime. We look straight ahead while a tentative sky stretches over O'Connell Street, trying to make itself comfortable on a giant spike. That's Spike City. And I'm going to finish with a poem from a series of poems I wrote about Caravaggio's 7 Acts of Mercy. This one is called Pilgrim, and it's about the character of the pilgrim in the painting who's on his way to Santiago de Compostela in Spain. Pilgrim, housing the stranger. Shelter me. I come from yonder or beyond. On my hat the pilgrim shell, Capasanta, holy hood, or Patina di mare, little comb of the sea. I tease out your motives, disentangle prejudice from better judgment, raise or smooth down your hackles, shelter me. I trawl coasts and borders with my scalloped edge, panning for haven, shelter me. I am the one he called the least of his brethren, with the long, thin face of Christ. I am James navigating to the field of stars, the hooded saint breaking bread, the angel incognito. I am your brother or sister, shelter me. And that's Pilgrim. And we're going to finish this evening with a song. Thank you for being part of our Poetry Ireland Voices of Witness event for the Dublin Arts and Human Rights Festival. Thanks to all the performers who took part and shared their powerful poems, stories and songs today. We're thinking of all those who raise their voices against injustice, and especially of those who suffer injustice, inequality and hardship. May we live to see a more equal and a more just world. We'll finish with another song from the wonderful Neve Parsons, and I believe this is the first airing of this particular song. I'll let Neve introduce it. Thank you.
I'm going to sing a song that was very recently written by a woman called Helen Grehan. Helen is one of three sisters, the Grehan sisters, who were very prominent in the 1960s and would have been an influence on me as females making their own records. The song is called Palestine Mother, and this is its first airing. Mother is sleeping, worn out from weeping, all day and all night. Her son has died. Now he's a martyr, forever after, torn from her bosom, coming from school. Her son threw stones at the Israeli soldiers, stones against bullets, straight through the skull. Gone like his brothers, too many others, gone like his father, gone massacred. Mother is dreaming of peace and of freedom, no more the bloodshed, no mother's children dead, no suicide bombers, no more child martyrs, no more Israeli fire down all her days and nights. Mother is sleeping, worn out from weeping, all day and all night. Who's next to die.